So the Red Wedding doesn't need much of an explanation at this point. It's one of the most shocking scenes in all of television and literature, and had such a profound effect on the Game of Thrones series, as well as on the public's perception of that series, and George R.R. Martin's style of writing. The scene took basically everyone by surprise, was pretty damn graphic to boot, and within the series world suddenly flipped the power dynamic on its head. To discuss the Red Wedding in detail would just be beating a dead drum at this point, because even people who haven't seen Game of Thrones know the Red Wedding. However, I want to talk about a time when an anime made me feel like I was watching the Red Wedding all over again, and how Yoshiki Tanaka had basically done this insane thing in his book long before George R.R. Martin made it cool. The series in question is The Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Now, while on the surface both series could not seem any more different, with one taking place in a fantasy setting with a medieval European aesthetic and whatnot, and the other in space with laser weapons and galactic travel, yet aside from that, the complexion of both series was really the same. Both had large casts of characters, many of whom were either super likable or extremely unlikable, a long and complex geopolitical history preceding the events of the show, and multiple factions vying for control during the series' run. After building a certain atmosphere within the series for a certain amount of time, establishing the power dynamic, the roles of characters, the ambitions of characters, both Yoshiki Tanaka and George R.R. Martin seemingly threw that into chaos with one iconic scene. Now, since both scenes I'll be talking about are pretty massive spoilers, I'm gonna assume that if you're still watching, you're caught up to Game of Thrones and have completed the original Legend of the Galactic Heroes anime. And so you have been warned. Assuming those who are still here have seen everything I'm talking about, I'll spare you guys all the prior context before the two scenes. In Legend of the Galactic Heroes episode 82, Yang Wen-li decides to enter peace talks with the Galactic Empire after the death of Edwin Fisher, seeing any further fighting as pointless. Of course, if these peace talks had went through, both Iserlohn and El Facil may have been independent. What Yang would have done from that point could only be guessed, but I don't think it's too far-fetched to think that with time to rebuild their economy and military in peacetime, another war to recapture Heinessen may have taken place, considering that Iserlohn fought the entire empire alone for quite some time. But this is assuming Yang could get a favorable treaty out of the empire that allows them to maintain autonomy enough to continue strengthening their military. Unfortunately, the meeting never happened, and the war was prolonged until the point Iserlohn accepted the overlordship of the empire. Either way, the future would have undoubtedly looked far brighter for the remainder of the Free Planets Alliance if the meeting went through as intended. In Game of Thrones, Robb Stark in his Northern Rebellion against the Lannisters and Baratheons to the south needed to consolidate the other major houses in the north, and assuming they already had the loyalty of the Boltons, the second biggest house to the Starks at that point, they needed to secure the alliance of the Freys, who controlled an important passageway at the time. Initially, Rosalind Frey would marry Robb Stark to unite the two houses and attain an important ally in the war against the ruling Lannisters. However, Robb Stark fell in love with another woman and convinced Edmure Tully to marry Rosalind Frey instead. The Tullys are definitely no small house, but this sudden change to the arranged plans did not go well with Walder Frey, who was expecting to be a relative of the potential king of all Westeros. But his indignation at this and past slights towards his house made him very willing to plot alongside the Lannisters and Boltons to change the end result of the wedding. Up to the point of the Red Wedding, Robb Stark had taken up rebellion against the royal family of Westeros, the Lannisters, and or Baratheons, due to their execution of his father, Ned Stark. He had been undefeated up until the Red Wedding, even defeating Jaime Lannister at the Battle of the Whispering Woods. He had seemed to be on course for a lot of success before the Red Wedding. Both Yang Wen-li and Robb Stark, young up-and-coming commanders seemingly destined for greatness, made one great mistake that negated all their military success. They underestimated the maliciousness of their enemies. They got too comfortable, and it cost them not only their lives, but almost their cause. In Yang Wen-li's case, not only was he killed, which is a huge loss in itself, but almost the entire El Facil revolutionary government was wiped out, which would have been an essential piece in any negotiations, and possibly resistance later on, as well as Commodore Fyodor Patrushev, which is also not a small loss. A young Julian Minchi had to take the reins of the resistance, El Facil was effectively out of the war, and the Iserlohn Republic was alone to face the might of the ever-growing empire. In Game of Thrones, Robb Stark's sudden death was compounded by the death of countless other Starks and Tullys, including his mother Catelyn. Edmure was captured, leaving House Tully without a leader. In the Stark household, Jon was at the wall, Sansa was stuck in King's Landing, Arya was on the run, and Theon was first a traitor and then was captured. There were no Starks left to avenge Robb, and in the post-Stark power vacuum in the north, the Boltons and Freys rose to the forefront after conspiring with the Lannisters to kill the Starks at the wedding. The main differences here are that Robb and his army were in a much more advantageous position going into the Red Wedding than Yang Wen-li was going into his peace talks. Yang Wen-li had lost Heinesen and was on the back foot of his fight with Reinhardt's empire. The peace talks may have potentially been to salvage any further damages to the remaining Alliance territory. However, as I mentioned before, those peace talks could have potentially led to a larger Alliance autonomous territory than what we ended up with. The only autonomous Alliance region under the Empire's rule ended up just being Iserlohn Fortress. It makes a big difference when an entire planet is added onto that equation, and the future is a lot less predictable that way. The next is that Yang Wen-li was only plotted against by one party, the Earth Cult, whose members within the Imperial Army were given directives to kill him. Although I suppose two parties if you count Andrew Falk, who had lost his mind and wanted to kill Yang Wen-li, which ultimately gave the Imperial Terrorists a reason to board the LOGH too. But Falk was played like a fiddle in this situation and eventually killed, so it's not exactly a parallel to Robb's situation. The Empire's top brass actually had full intention on holding these peace talks, but the Earth Cult wanted them to resume hostilities with each other as well as send a message of fear, so they saw it fit to assassinate Yang Wen-li before he could make peace with Reinhardt. You can also consider that if the Alliance and Empire are at any kind of peace, they would have focused their efforts on the Earth Cult, who would have surely gotten wiped out way faster than they did if they tried to take on two armies at once. The final difference is that the Starks eventually turned the tide, while the Free Planets Alliance never really could. Jon eventually returned from the Wall and took up the mantle of King of the North. Sansa broke free of the shackles of the royal family, the Boltons and Littlefinger, bringing House Arryn along, defeating the Boltons and Karstarks to take the North back, and Arya was back with newfound abilities and confidence, wiping out the Freys entirely. The Iserlohn Republic put up an admirable resistance, but with influential alliance figures such as Yang Wen-li, Merkatz, Jessica Edwards, Zhao Rebello, Walter von Schenkopf, and Edwin Fisher all dead, the Iserlohn Republic had little in the way of military or political influence left to give by the end of the show. And Julian probably made the smartest decision he could have made, given his situation. Well, that's my video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Just a little quick side note, I have my own Discord channel if you're interested in chatting with me about whatever, and I do like to stream different games every once in a while, so let me know what you think about that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again, and take care.